And now we are returning back to the front-end side. So let's make sure our application is running, which it is. But let's say we have gotten tired of the current theme. So for a second, I'll head back over to Tweak CN and I'll choose another theme of our dashboard. There's the boring default, there's the amber, amethyst, bubblegum. So for the time being, let's go with, I like this one, cyberpunk. So let's go ahead and take the code, simply copy it, and then back within our source, app.css, we need to replace the theme inline, the root, and the dark. So these are the three that we need to remove. Keep the layer components, but remove the theme, dark, and root. As soon as you do that, our application will completely change. I'll keep this theme for some time and then we might switch it back later on. Now, in our last front-end lesson, it was all about learning how the data provider works, where we created a mock data provider with static data. We implemented the endpoints and used them on the subjects page to display all the subjects without filtering and pagination. In this lesson, we'll replace that with a REST data provider, officially making this a full stack PERN course. Now, Refine offers a REST data provider that makes it easier to build custom data providers for REST APIs. You just have to give it your API's base URL and rules, and the Refine will automatically handle fetching, creating, updating, and deleting data without manual fetch or Axios calls. So let's install it by opening up our terminal, this time switching back to our frontend side, so cd classroom frontend, and run npm at refinedev/rest. And before we implement the REST data provider, we'll have to code out a lot of different types that we want to use throughout this application. Thankfully, we already have the types file where we only have the subject. But now we'll also have to keep track of the departments, of all the different responses, and everything else that needs types in our application. Since this isn't a TypeScript tutorial, I won't bother you with typing these out manually. So in the video kit link down in the description, you'll be able to find a full types index.ts file, which you can copy and paste over here. It starts with the subject and then moves over to the list, which should seem familiar because this is exactly what our backend is returning. Still, if you want to get a full TypeScript course, let me know down in the comments below and I'll create it. Now, let's create a new .env file, this time in the front-end part of our application, and add a vite backend base URL, which is going to be equal to http://localhost 8000/API/ at the end. And instead of importing this variable everywhere by simply typing this, import meta, env, vite, backend base URL, and so on, we'll create a constant so that we can simply say backend URL. Much simpler, right? To do that, we can head over to source constants, where we have declared these departments. And I'll now provide you with a list of full departments, department options, and everything else that is static within our application. I'll also leave it linked in the video kit down below, so you can copy and paste these constants index.ts. One of the lines right here is that backend base URL that we created, which now we can use by simply referring to a variable instead of this string of characters. Don't forget to add your .env in the git ignore part of the application if it's not already there. I can't see it, so I'll definitely do .env right here to make sure that it doesn't get pushed over to GitHub. Now head over to source providers data.ts and let's implement a new REST data provider. Idea is the same with the get list and get one endpoints, but the syntax will change a bit. So let's start implementing it from scratch one more time. I'll first define the options that we need for our data provider. Of a type, create data provider options coming from refine dev rest, and that's going to be equal to an object where we can define the options specifically for get list. And then we'll create a new data provider by saying const destructured data provider is equal to create data provider coming from refine dev rest, and then pass in the backend base URL coming from constants, as well as the options. Finally, export the data provider like this by saying export data provider. Now, within this get list, we can define something known as get endpoint, which is going to take in the resource and it'll simply return that resource. Then we can also map the response. That's going to be an asynchronous function where we get access to the response, and we want to get access to the payload that we're passing over of a type list response is going to be equal to await response.json. And then we simply want to return the data that we get from the payload by saying payload.data, or if it doesn't exist, it'll be an empty array. And finally, we want to get the total count, which is going to be equal to an asynchronous call that's going to take in the response. It'll first take in the payload, as before, of a type list response. That's going to be equal to await response.json. And then from it, we'll extract the total by saying return payload.pagination (total), or if it doesn't exist, payload.data (length), or if it doesn't exist, then 0. So we now created 3 different endpoints that we can call that return the responses and the total count. If we do this properly, then Refine will handle it in a way that allows us not to have to change anything within our application. So if you now head over to the subjects list, we don't have to do absolutely any changes here for this to work properly. But still, the application will break. If you check it out, you'll see that we get an error. That's okay. It's breaking because of the department value. Earlier, when we mocked subjects, department was a string, but now department is an object. So to fix this, go to the subjects list and change the department value in the subject column. So that's going to be right here under columns. And we have the department, and the accessor key is going to be the department.name because the department is an object. Now, just before we test it out, make sure to head over to your .env and make sure that the name is spelled correctly. For me, it doesn't say base, so just make sure this is correct. Then if you head over to the browser, would you look at that? These 2 rows are coming directly from our database. The descriptions we wrote, the departments, the names, and even the codes of those subjects are here, and we can see the department. This is working great. Finally, we can see the real data that we have in our database on the front-end application. But hey, if you search for it, something like data, you'll notice it doesn't do anything. And if we try to map over the departments, yeah, these departments aren't yet real. This is just fake dummy data for now. So that's not gonna work, even though we tested it and implemented it on the backend. Well, to make it work, we have to build the search query params and let Refine know about them. So head back over into our data under providers, and right here below the get endpoint, build query params. It's going to be an asynchronous function where you get access to the resource, the pagination, as well as the filters. And then we can do something with them, such as we can set the page to be equal to pagination, (current page, or 1. This is coming from the backend. Then we can set the page size to be equal to pagination, (page size, or 10. And then we can set the params to be equal to page and the limit, which is going to be page size. Finally, we want to loop through all of the Refine filters by saying filters, (for each filter. We want to extract the field name. So field is equal to field in filter. If it exists, it's going to be filter.field or an empty string. Then we want to convert the filter value to string for query params by saying value of string filter.value. And then we want to handle the filters only for the subject's resource. So if resource is triple equal to subjects, in that case, we can check if the field is triple equal to department, then we want to set the params dot department to be equal to the value, like this. And similarly, if the field is equal to name or field is triple equal to code, in that case, we want to add that as the search param. So this is the department param and this is the search param. Just so TypeScript knows what the params are, we can define the type of these params, which is going to be a record that accepts a string and a string or a number. And finally, we have to build those params, which means that we have to return them. So say return params. Perfect. So now we're building out the params that our API will be able to consume. So now if you try to search by code, I think we implemented the search by code. So if you type 101, you can see that you'll get the one that matches that code. If we try to search by name, such as signals, that also is working. What about data? Yep, data structures, that works as well. And that's exactly what we wanted. Now we have to make it work for the departments because currently we're displaying a list of fake departments that don't yet exist within our application. To implement that, we have to make a GET request to call the department router and then display it. It'll be similar to subject router GET request that we implemented before. We'll do that later as you already learned the main thing, and that is getting back the data with support for pagination, search, and filtering. It's all about practice. You can get the departments by yourself by pausing this video and trying to implement it, or we can do it later. For now, let's push this over to GitHub so we can get it checked by CodeRabbit. I'll first run git status to check which branch we're on. It seems like we're on the main, which is great. And then we can create a new branch by running git checkout -b, and I'll call it feat rest data provider. Then we can run git add dot, git commit -m, implement rest data provider, and finally git push, but we'll have to set the upstream to the origin branch. So copy and paste this command. Once that is done, head over to GitHub, but open up your frontend repository, not the backend one, and then compare and open up a pull request. Then let's wait a couple of seconds for CodeRabbit to wake up and a couple of minutes for it to provide a code review. And there we go. This PR establishes backend integration infrastructure by introducing envs, configuration files, restructuring dependencies, and completely redesigning the CSS theme. But we did that in a couple of seconds. So here's the diagram, but this time from the client side. Client or React requests the list of resources alongside with filters and pagination. Then Refine Data Provider maps filters to backend format, such as the department or the department name. It makes a GET request to our backend API, which returns the payload with the data. And finally, we can render it back to the frontend. In this case, there's a slight issue with ESLint and a minor issue with a Refine Dev simple REST dependency. Now that we're using the REST API, no longer do we need simple REST. This is such a nice catch that allows us to very easily remove an extra dependency to our application that we don't actually need. And finally, we have some minor issues of unused options within the constants, but we're planning on using these later on, so that's good. And another suggestion right here is that we can add checks and verifications to make sure that our environment variables actually exist. But we can do that once we actually add them. But this is potentially huge. Here in the provider, we're trying to read the payload multiple times, but without cloning it. Since a response body stream can only be consumed once, the second call will fail at runtime. So we have to use response.clone.json in both functions to independently read the response body. So the fix is clear. Both in the map response and in the get total count, use await response clone JSON. We can do that right here by heading over to the data in the provider. And then instead of response JSON, we can use response clone JSON. Similarly, we need to add the validation for the missing backend base URL. Based on the search results, Both of these require that base URL, which is coming from here, but envs could be undefined if you misspell them like I did. So what it's suggesting is that we add this validation within the data.ts file, which is exactly what I'll do. So if we head here at the top, I'll check if there is no backend base URL variable, then we simply want to throw a variable letting us know that we need to add it to the env file. With that in mind, I'll go ahead and add those additional changes by committing them and saying implement CodeRabbit suggestions and pushing them. Once the changes are recognized, we can immediately merge the pull request and get back to our application by checking out to the main branch and running a git pull, so we pull the latest changes to the main branch as well. And with that, we are ready to continue with the development of the application.